All right. Good evening, everybody. Good evening. It's really great to see all of you, and I'm just going to do a little sound check. Sonia, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear us okay? Great. So for those of you that are here in the room, just so you're aware, what's on the screen over here is what people at home are seeing on YouTube. We've got the multiple cameras set up throughout the room, and then I'm actually going to turn on this camera too. In a second, and that way, as the presenters present tonight, you'll be able to see us present. I'll do that in just a second. Anyway, as I mentioned before, you all got some food. I just want to first and foremost welcome you to the Meridian Library. It is an awkward setup here, for sure. We've tried very hard to maintain social distancing as best we can for everybody. Particularly since you're eating, and we appreciate that, and would kind of just ask again, since you're in a school, just like in a regular building, please put your mask on when you're done eating. That would be great. But tonight, we're really excited to have you. And it's been a real thrill setting up for tonight and trying to get all the technology to work, and the interdependence between the general government staff and our staff has really, again, sort of pulled it off. So we're proud to be here. So with that, I do want to turn it over to Dave Tarter, our mayor. And then I think if you'll turn it over to perhaps our chair after you're done saying a few words, that's great. Couple rules for tonight. Just because we are on YouTube, the only way that you'll be heard on YouTube is to use a mic. So we've set some around strategically. So hopefully everybody will be able to use it as needed. So Mayor Tarter.
All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Noonan. It's a pleasure for us to join you here. And I just want to compliment you on this incredible facility. I've been through it, but I haven't really spent as much time as I would like in this library, and the whole place is just gorgeous. And I want to congratulate you and the school board and city or school staff on getting this constructed on time and on budget. I think in these days, that's quite an accomplishment. And I think this school that does also cement Falls Church's place as one of the leading school systems in Virginia, if not the country. So my congratulations to you and to all of our school friends here. And I also want to thank our teachers and school staff who have had, I think, a really tough year or so with COVID, but they've managed to keep everyone going and allow them not just to keep going, but to thrive. And so I want to, on behalf of the city side of things, also give you our thanks for that. And then more generally, if I could also, to just comment on the collaboration we've had these past few years. I know it's been challenging times in a lot of ways, but so much has been accomplished over these past few years, particularly the school we're sitting on, but 10 acres of development that'll begin soon. And just a lot of great work that's happened between the city side and the school side, particularly these past years. I imagine some have even compared it to a zipper. And we may hear that just in a minute. So I know the vice mayor is going to elaborate a little bit more on the collaboration we've had these past years, but I wanted to personally thank you all for the great work we've done together. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Chair Litton, and again, our thanks for being here together.
Is that working now? Okay, great. Well, thank you, Mayor Tarter. And again, welcome to all of you. We're really excited to have everybody here. And I know we're all excited tonight. We have current members and our newly elected members for both the city council and the school board here tonight. So welcome to all of you. We are excited to begin to make this transition. So yeah, I think we're all excited to be here tonight. I agree with you that the last few years, I think the budget process has gone really well. And I think this is part of it, when we all gather together and have some time to collaborate and really take the time to work together. So I know the school board is looking forward to the process ahead with all of you. And I think we're all hoping for another smooth year with a budget. So with that, I will turn it over to Vice Mayor Connolly.
Thank you, Chair Litton. So this is when I get to do my almost annual, we didn't do it last year, reminder about the zipper. And the zipper started, that's not in your show, is it? Okay, sorry, Shelley, can you see it? We'll send you a copy of it. The zipper started 4 years ago. We were at a point where many of us in this room had sat through years and years of meetings trying to get this high school built. And it required tons of collaboration between the school board and the city council and the school staff and the general government staff. And there was no way we were going to get to this point unless we had collaborated to that point, and we kept going. So I kept thinking about it as a zipper because every step had to happen before the next step could happen. And sometimes we were getting ahead of ourselves and saying, oh, but 3 years from now, we got to worry about this. And it was really a reminder to say one step at a time, and there's going to be some problems and the zipper is going to get stuck a few times, but we all need to work together to get through that. And we had several meetings that were really uncomfortable as we tried to figure out the timing of the bonds and the ordering of the steel. So this is the latest iteration of the zipper, and it starts on the right-hand side back in 2008 with an FCCPS facility study. And I think there's a few of us in the room that were part of that. And it goes all the way up to 2021, where I've got the street naming for the Falls Church Gateway Partners development and the completion of the athletic fields and tennis courts. But this never would have happened if there wasn't great collaboration. So as we go forward, there's still a lot more steps, and the zipper isn't quite all the way zipped up because we have to work out what's going to happen next door and how it's all going to work with students in school and teachers coming to school every day. But I want to thank all of you who have participated in the zipper thus far, and welcome those of you who are new, because I think it's going to be, there's a lot to look forward to, especially if we all work together. Thanks.
This presentation is always very impressive to be able to see all the distance that we've traveled together. And so thank you for putting that together. My name is Wyatt Shields. I'm the city manager, and we will start tonight off with a presentation by the school staff on key strategic objectives over the coming planning period. On the general government side, what we traditionally do at this time of the year is to share our best forecast on the revenues, and we'll do that tonight. Our Chief Financial Officer, Kieran Bawa, will join us and provide her information to the full group. I will also spend a little bit of time at the end just to report out on bi-weekly or every other week meetings that the city government, city general government and school staff have together formally with, well, Gilbane is still a part of those meetings, as well as the Falls Church Gateway Partners, and just give everybody an update on the things we talk about and a look ahead of some of the major construction activities that will be happening this spring and this summer. So that's some of the material that we plan to cover today. Look forward to tonight's discussion. One other note that I will make for those who aren't familiar with this process is that typically the last meeting in December, which will be December 13th, the city council provides budget guidance. And that's very useful to me in trying to work with staff and putting together budget recommendations, which come to the council in March. But it's also really important that planning happen together with the school board, so that, as Chair Litton has noted, we have had pretty smooth budgeting for the past 3 years, really, with Superintendent Noonan's arrival, and I think everybody coming together on trying to accomplish big things together. So we hope to continue that process, but an important first step in that is the council's consideration of advanced budget guidance, which they'll be taking up on December 13th next week. Peter, look forward to a great discussion tonight.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Wyatt. So we have about 98 slides. Just kidding. That we want to share, and we have about 30 slides, maybe a few less than that we'd like to share with you tonight. That begins to forecast a little bit about what our budget is going to look like, or we anticipate our budget looking like in the City of Falls Church schools. We, much like has been expressed already tonight, are really proud of the partnership. Excited that we've had this relationship in the budget process for the last few years, sort of a handshake revenue sharing deal with some rough contours around it that has really, I think, allowed for us to create circumstances whereby we don't really have a lot of conflict in the budget process. And it's been quite nice. And this is a pretty extraordinary year. So I was leaving the house earlier, and I was talking to one of my kids, and she said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I have a meeting tonight, starts the budget process." And she said, "Oh, joy." And I said, "No, it's really not that bad." And I explained to her why, and hopefully we can all kind of continue to to follow that path. So thanks again. I want to start like we start many of our presentations, talking about our work here in the city schools. We've shared with you previously, you may remember we had a dinner, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, at the community center where we broke bread together. We talked about our goals for the coming years and the like. And this has morphed since then. We gave you a placemat, and the reason that it's the placemat, or we call it affectionately the placemat, is because everybody has a place at our table. So everyone should be able to find themselves somewhere in this. But one of the things I want to just point out to you as we go into the budget cycle, like in every other year, kids are right at the center of everything that we do. And the decisions that we make are really student-centered, student-focused, whether it's around the budget, whether it's around transportation, whether it's around snow calls or COVID, whatever the case may be, we really do want to put kids at the center. The 3 major areas of emphasis that we've been working on in some form or fashion for the last several years really relate to this notion of, first, a caring culture. What makes the City of Falls Church Schools special? And we asked that question this morning at one of our meetings, and what we learned from everyone around the table was, almost to a person, the relationships that we have with our kids, the relationships that we have with our families, the size being small, really creates a unique opportunity and a unique experience for all of us to be really engaged in a culture where everybody cares for each other in ways that I think are extraordinary. We also are working on our equity, ensuring that every student gets what they need in the moment that they need it. We know that not everyone comes to us with the same background, the same experiences, and the like. And for that, we need to create these opportunities for equity. And then the International Baccalaureate, of course, is, I think, one of the shining stars of the City of Falls Church Schools. There are 7 school districts across the country that have K-12 International Baccalaureate programs. This year, we have brought in Jesse Thackeray as part of the IB program. So we now are pre-K-12 IB. This year, we'll go through the recertification process with IB, and we've already learned that we're on a very good track for that recertification. Around this placemat, you'll see some things, just sort of comments related to each of those, and I won't go into them, but I did want to share our placemat for a second with you as we think about where we're headed this year. All right, so another thing that's happening sort of simultaneously to the work that we've been doing in the schools is we are deeply engaged right now in a strategic planning process. We did bring in a group called Ed Elements, who's leading us and guiding us through this work. We've had now over 1,000 touches, meaning either someone came to a community meeting that we've held, someone came to a focus group, someone gave us information and feedback through our online feedback process and the like, but we've had over 1,000 people at this point give us information about what their hopes, dreams, and desires for the City of Falls Church are. And so we are done now with the plan and align phase, and we're moving into the foundations phase. And we'll have 2 days, actually, tomorrow and the next day, where we're bringing together both the design team and the steering committee to begin thinking about, okay, what is this actually going to look like? What are those 5 or 6 really important, really meaningful pathways that will lead us to success? And so the next couple of days will be spent with that. We churned through all of the data and information that was shared with us through all of the different contacts that we've gotten, and have gotten some really great information from the community. And the community really is everybody. So it's students and parents, and it's business owners, the school board, staff across the city and general government have also engaged to some degree. So as we move forward, we're moving into the design and launch, and we're looking forward to setting a course for the next 3, 5, 7 years through our strategic planning process. Next on the slide, for some reason the clicker's not working. I want to start with the current year. This huge celebration for us this year. If you didn't make it to a football game, I'm sorry you didn't make it to a football game this year. But our football team this year made it to 1 game short of the state semifinals, which was the deepest run they've had in the history of Meridian. No, but in the history of the high school here and the old George Mason. But this is them coming out of the vomitorium, the tunnels in the building. They fill it with smoke, and it's quite a moment as they run onto the field. So one of the things that I want to just reiterate and sort of double down on is this notion of us really valuing the partnership with you as city council members and with the general government. And we want to thank you for your incredible, all of your incredible efforts around the investment in our schools. The collaboration over the last 3 years and 4 years has really presented an opportunity for us to work smoothly together. And when we think about the work that we've done, we have presented for the last 3 years in a row a budget that falls within organic guidance that allows us then through the revenue sharing to get our budget done. And just a spoiler alert, we're doing it again this year. So I'll share with you some information about the budget and kind of where we are. But our budget impact will be less than what the organic growth is that's been shared with us so far. The other thing that I want to make sure we're really clear about is the work that you all have done to help us open this. And now we get to help you open next door. And we want to be really great partners with you as we think about that and support you in that work as well. And now it's working. So let me give you a quick update on the high school project. We are all but done here. We are at the phase now where there's still a few things outside that we need to bring in that are actually on back order. So some outdoor furniture, things like that are stuck in the supply chain, but they will be here. And we are excited. But with that aside, we have had an open and functional high school since January 1 of last year. So we were not only on time, we were early, and we were not only on budget, Mayor Tarter, we're actually under budget. So I'm happy to announce tonight that through the outstanding partnership, we actually are going to be able to return $100,000 of bond funds to the city from this project. We were going to bring the big check, Debbie, and we were going to put, city council over. But anyway, we're very excited to have come in under budget. And I think that was a win for all of us, but it wasn't done in isolation. It wasn't us and it wasn't the general government. It really was a combination effort by all of us. So you've seen these slides before. I just want to reorient you. This is this year's 2022 approved budget and expenditures. Just as a reminder, this is our revenue pie over here. The blue is our teachers, the transfer from the general government. 14.7% comes from the state, about 1% comes from federal government, about 1.8 comes from fees and others, and then we use a little bit of beginning balance to make our budget work. But the big nugget here is that 81.5% of our budget comes through the local transfer from the city council through the general government. Our expenditures, and this is where we spend our money, is almost exclusively on teachers if you look at it as part of the pie, teachers and staff. So 63% of our budget is salaries, 23% roughly are benefits. Then we have some contracted services, materials and supplies, utilities, and then capital replacements, capital and some transfers and reserves. But the big idea here that I want to remind you all in the community of is that the vast majority of our budget is spent on people. And we are a people organization. This is what we do. We work with kids. So it's the right place to spend our money. So just a little bit of information about enrollment. We have seen enrollment not bounce back across the country. So we are not in a unique place compared to other school systems around the country. But bottom line, what I wanted to share with you is that enrollment as of the first month of school was 2502. We had projected last year for 2605, which means that we are 103 students down from projection. So we didn't hire any teachers, any additional teachers this year because we didn't grow. But we did bounce back to some degree, but we're still down 14 students from our enrollment last year. And to kind of put that into a little bit of perspective, just to kind of show you where we are in the context of the region, you will see last year in 2021, there was a range of about 2.8 all the way up to 5.6. And we had a 5.6% enrollment drop last year. But this year we have a 0.3% enrollment drop versus a 0.8 enrollment drop in some of the areas that were much smaller last year. So we are seeing a very different sort of pattern of enrollment comparatively to the region. So what about some of our special populations? What are we seeing among them? What we're seeing is that we are seeing fewer students that are on free and reduced lunch. But what's an interesting caveat to that is this year, the federal government provided free lunch for all kids. So it may have inhibited some families from applying for free lunch or free breakfast because they knew it was coming. But in terms of the numbers, we know that we are down for those people that did file forms, -5 in economically disadvantaged. We did grow in the area of students with disabilities. As I think many of you know in the room, we are a destination district for many military, State Department, and the like families for students with disabilities. We saw a reduction of those students that were homeschooled. And so we had 34 less. And so now we're down to 35 students that were homeschooled this year versus 69 last year. So we're seeing people that were homeschooling coming back. And that was a really important measure for us to watch. And our English speakers of other languages that are levels 1 through 4 are at 115. And that's been a very steady number. So our projected enrollment comes from, I think all of you know, the Weldon Cooper Center at the University of Virginia. Each year they provide us information that looks at birth and death rates in the region and the like. And what they try to do is provide us with some sense of what they see in terms of trends in enrollment going forward. The one thing that they don't take into account is anything that hasn't been officially permitted in the division. So for example, they would now probably take into account Founders Row, but they won't take into account what's going on across the street, right? Because that's a future project, just to give you some information about what we're looking at. But they do look at 15, they have been a reliable partner for 15 years. They've done a nice job recently and have noticed a decline in births in the city and the region, and will make it more likely that our enrollment probably won't grow over time. We did share with you tonight also, by the way, the students by dwelling. And we did find some patterns in there that I think were really interesting from the perspective of where did our students go and where did they leave from. And one of the things that we saw in there was that a significant amount of students left Falls Green. And I think that probably was because the State Department changed the way that they put families into the Falls Green apartments a couple of years ago, and that may have been the reason. But these are some of the factors that influence our projections. They also gave us 3 different projections this year. So they hedged again. You might remember last year when we shared our guidance with you, they gave us 3 different sets of ideas. If everybody comes back, if half the kids come back, or if no one comes back that went away from the pandemic. Well, they did the same thing again this year, but they just called it something else. This year, they have a short term, a medium term, and a long term. And here's the calculus that they use for each of those. And the one that we ended up utilizing, just so that you know in advance, is we've decided to use the short term planning projection, which is the most conservative planning projection of all of them. So what you'll see here is in 22, the short term is 2431. That means that we may lose 16 more students over the course of this coming year. Again, we believe that that's a super conservative approach. I don't know that that's necessarily going to happen. The interesting thing in all of this has been trying to do the calculus around student enrollments in the context of COVID. It's been very challenging. But one of the things that we do know is that these 16, if we do lose 16 students, who we have today in the classrooms is likely enough. So in terms of forecasted expenditures, just some things to remember. The first is, we are the largest public employer in the city. We have nearly 500 employees in our system. Retention and recruitment are really important to our system. And as I said at the beginning, it really is a people organization. You saw from our budget where we play or where we spend our money. And we're looking at that again. And 2 years ago, there was a step, and I'll go into this a little bit more in a few minutes. There was a step missed because 2 years ago, no one in the City of Falls Church schools got a step or a cost of living adjustment. No one got a raise. But just as a reminder, the step and grade system is the common system that are used in schools. It's used in the police department. It's used in a variety of different ways. And a step for us, for eligible employees for next year is $950,000. And we do intend to look at trying to make up that lost step from 2 years ago, where our staff didn't get a step or a raise. Now, the reason that it's less for looking at some of our employees that missed the step is because some people left, right? So some people left the system, some people became ineligible for the step. and the like. So what we're looking at is a single step is 950,000. The makeup step is 640,000. And the other thing to remember is that our new teachers, and this is something that we're going to look at in the long term, don't receive any kind of additional step in their compensation until their fourth year. They're held flat for 3 years. So if there's a cost of living adjustment, they get that, but they don't get the step. And the last is the cost of living adjustment. I just want to say this out loud, and that is that 1% for our employees to get a 1% cost of living adjustment is $400,000. So that's important to know as we think about planning. So like the city, we are taking a conservative approach to our health insurance rates and are planning a 10% increase for both the employer and the employee rate that's being paid in. So that would cost us $330,000. And we do participate in the same health plan as the general government. We are cautiously optimistic that there will be some potential rate decrease in the Virginia retirement system, which actually would bring us a little bit of money back to the system. We believe that that's a good long-term use of funds by the state that could permanently support a reduction in the rate while maintaining a whole VRS system. And then from the city retirement, we look like we're going to save about $1,800 based on the actuarial report that we've gotten. So what we're looking at is first our students in terms of our budget requests as well. We know that this has been a challenging 2 years for all of our kids, whether it's been through mental and emotional support that they've been missing, the opportunities to connect with others. We have a number of students that we know struggled academically, who need extra support. We also know that our staff has some of the same stressors. And we've seen some very significant issues with some of our staff to the extent that we have done more referrals to our EAP program than we've ever done before. And we know that there are going to be some changes that we need to make based on the feedback from our strategic plan. So we are including those in as drivers as well. So here's where we are forecasting our expenditures in the city schools. We're looking at $1 million roughly to do a single step for all eligible employees. We're looking at doing the restoration step for those that missed it in 21, which is 0.6,600,000. We're looking at a 2% cost of living adjustment. Remember, their health insurance alone is going up 10%. So we know we need to do something for cost of living. But the 2% cost of living adjustment will cost us $800,000. Retirement benefits of $300,000, and then we will be to the good in terms of the retirement rates if the legislature does pass that bill that allows for that rate change, and we'll look at a $500,000 savings in retirement rates, and then $2 million in new budget requests. So we know that we're not going to be able to do this number, right? We know that right now. But what we do know is that when we went out to our schools and we talked to our teachers and we talked to our staff, which we always do before the budget, we came back with $2 million in new requests. So, so we have to take a look at that list and figure out what we're going to do that are the most meaningful and give us the most bang for our buck. So where are we going to get some of the revenue in addition to the local transfer? And the first is from the federal government. We are projected to, this is what our current revenue is, and this money pays for everything associated with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, so IDEA. And that is projected to decrease by nearly $20,000. Our state aid is also projected to decrease by $243,000. And the reason that that is going to be decreased is because our enrollment dropped. Now, in the state, they have said, and you'll hear in the news, but there's a hold harmless provision, right? The state is going to make up for whatever you lose in revenue because of lost enrollment. Well, that's partially true. What they don't tell you is that if your sales tax increases commensurate with how much you lost in your state aid, they consider you whole, right? So we lost $243,000 in state aid, but our sales tax is projected to grow by $243,000. So there's a difference of about $700. So the state is going to tell us at this point, you know, it's a wash. You don't need to hit the hold harmless category because you made up for your losses in state aid. So that is part of our, I think, part of our growing legislative packet or at least part of our advocacy points downstate, is that if we lose enrollment, you shouldn't make it up with sales tax. We should get our hold harmless from there. So state aid is a wash with sales tax, and our federal revenue is going down. That's not a good picture for us when we look at other sources of revenue. So when we think about state and federal revenue being projected as flat, and we want to do all of this compensation, we know that we've got to take a good hard look at some of those other things. So we've talked with our staff, and what we know is that compensation is number one. So what we are looking at doing is a step, the restorative step, a 2% COLA, and then funding about $500,000 of those additional costs that have come from the schools, not the $2 million worth. So what we believe we will need to operate the schools for next year is a 6.2% transfer from the city council through the general government. With that, it's lower than the projected organic revenue that's coming into the city. So this would be the fourth year in a row that we would again come in at or below what the organic growth in the city is. So that is looking like what we're going to need to be able to operate. So in summary, again, we'll fall within organic revenue. On the high school project, due to the really great fiscal stewardship of our team, which includes Kristen Michael and Michelle Kopic in the budget office, along with Brailsford and Dunleavy, who helped us be able to return some money to the city on the bond. Really great news, and this is a real nod to Kieran Bawa and to Wyatt, is getting that lower bond financing was really an important piece at the beginning of this project. So there was a lot of savings as well there. And the high school project originally had a projected tax increase of 7 cents when the bonds were approved by the voters. But the actual impact of the tax rate has been significantly lower. And I think that's because of the really strong project management and fiscal stewardship that we in the schools, along with the general government, have shown. So with that, I just will share with you what our preliminary budget calendar looks like. And we will give you copies of all of this. It's in board docs. You can pull it down as well. But our start date is November 23rd, and we're looking at an end date of around May 17th, where we'll finalize, the school board will finalize the budget. So with that, I would say we would be open to any questions that you have now, or perhaps it would be better to go through Wyatt's presentation so you can see both of them together. So Madam Chair, as my boss, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Noonan. Wyatt, would you guys like to go ahead? Why don't we go ahead and do that, and then we can open it up to questions from everybody.
All right, I'm going to take a second and switch the presentation here.
Thank you, Chair Litton. Thank you, Peter, for that very informative presentation. The heart of our presentation is going to be provided by our Chief Financial Officer, Kieran Bawa. And Peter's last slide was on calendar. So one kind of on the big picture in terms of calendar, we present our budget, the school board will present its budget, and I will present a general government budget to the city council in March. And so there's sort of three big areas of work that are happening in this lead up to March. One is the capital improvements program, and Cindy Mester is our staff lead for the CIP, and that pulls in the school capital requests as well as general government capital requests. And so between now and March, that's going to work through the planning commission, and the planning commission will give a recommendation to the city council. The school board will be considering the superintendent's recommendations. That recommendation then gets built into the budget that's presented in March. And meanwhile, while those two public processes are happening, we're working kind of behind the scenes with department heads to develop our budget recommendations. So in effect, the general government's about 2 months behind Dr. Noonan in terms of putting our budget requests for general government operations. So I want that to people just be aware of that sort of that timing context, because right now we're just focused really on what is the revenue picture looking at like, and then I'll describe some of the main strategic objectives we're trying to accomplish with next year's budget. So Karen, let me turn it over to you, and this is the slide clicker, and why don't you come on up? There it goes.
I take this off? I'm more than 6 feet from all of you. Good evening, Mayor Tarter, members of the City Council, and School Board Chair, Ms. Liddon, and members of the school board. We have for you the preliminary projections, revenue projections for fiscal year '23. And after that, we'll take a quick look at the known budget drivers and some of the anticipated budget drivers that we're going to know in the near future in the next few months, and then the budget calendar. Before we delve into the heart of the presentation, I would like to take a quick 1 minute to go over some of the indicators, the outlook, the economic outlook on the national and the regional level. So at the national level, the rate of inflation accelerated to 6.2% in October of this year. And that was as a result of the pandemic related supply chain disruptions and labor shortages. This number was 1.2% for the 12 months that ended October 2020. So that is a big increase over last year. At the state level, the Virginia state economy is on a solid path towards recovery. At least that's the message we're seeing. The revenues in fiscal year 21 were over 2.6 billion higher than projected, and it exceeded even the pre-pandemic expectations. In the current fiscal year 22, state revenues are tracking well ahead of their adopted budget numbers. Estimates with revenue collections increased at almost 12%, 11.8% through October of this year, which is the first 4 months of their fiscal year, compared to projections of an 8% decline. So the state economy is steadily growing. The unemployment continues to recover at 4.6% in October. But it still remains 4.2 million below pre-pandemic levels. So that's another indicator we continue to monitor. The U.S. Feds continue to maintain its funds target rate well below 1% from 0 to 0.25%. And it's expected it's going to continue at least till the middle of next year. So we'll keep that in mind when we look at our revenue. And the housing market continues to grow. And the next slide will show the chart that the home sale prices through October of 2021 compared to the same period in October 2020. So that's the average sale price and the percentage change. And so City of Falls Church with one of the highest average home sale price at $899,000. Among some of the major neighboring jurisdictions saw an 8.3% increase over last year. And this data is based from Bright MLS. It's a source of multiple listing services, which has information on properties, sale of properties in the region. Slide number 5 shows the current year's fiscal general fund revenues budget, which is 104.7 million, with real estate revenues for residential and commercial, little shy of 60%, and 25% of the, I want to point out to this quarter, are other taxes, which make up for the 25% of the pie, the revenue pie for the city. And the remaining 25% coming from charges for services, federal and state grants that we get, and license and permits, and other revenues that we get, which include the sales of properties that we have, the equipment and things like that. Those are minor. But so moving along, looking forward at the preliminary revenue projections forecast for 2023, real estate revenue for City of Falls Church, the assessed values are projected to grow at an overall rate of 5.7%, with the residential AV growth at 8% and keeping commercial flat. The new construction is not factored in this number quite yet, and may possibly offset any potential decreases. that we may see in the commercial. We are still evaluating the vacancy factor, the rent rates, and the hotels. And so any decreases may be offset by projected increases in new construction. And I would also like to note at this point that the city has a 70 to 30% residential commercial split. Rentals, apartments are included in the commercial, and condos are considered residential. So that's the split there. So on the regional level, so far we're able to get only the published numbers for Fairfax County. They have an overall, they're projecting an overall revenue growth, assessed value growth of 7%, with residential growth at 8.7% and a negative 0.5% decline of growth in commercial, which is offset by the new construction that they're projecting. These numbers remain to be polished on all jurisdictions. Arlington, we have seen a projection of somewhere in the overall, somewhere hovering around 2%, and Alexandria hovering around 4%. They are still working on their budget projections, so there are no concrete split between residential and commercial, but that's the mixed what we are seeing. We will have our refined numbers for assessed values for the city in the next coming couple of months, and these will get refined when the city manager brings his budget to you. So just to put it all together, with the 5.7% real estate tax revenue growth, along with a projected 15.6% projected growth in all other tax revenues, which include personal property, sales tax, meals tax, business license, and other taxes. We are expecting a total tax revenue to grow by 8.4%, which would yield an additional revenue of approximately $7 million. So despite the strong revenue growth, I would like to point out that there could be significant impact to the city from the state government, the legislation that is still out there. And after adjustments for elimination of the grocery tax, one of the things that we have heard of on the revenue side, the net new revenue the projection would drop down to $5.5 million. And as in the recent past, along the lines of the revenue share spirit that we have shared with the schools, the remaining new revenue would be generated from the tax revenues, would be split 50-50 between the schools and the general government. So this chart number 8 shows total assessed value of real estate, which is slightly over $4.5 billion. In 2021, as of January 1 of 2021, which has seen an average growth of 4% total in the last 14 years, from 2008 all the way to 2021. And both residential, which is the light blue bars, and commercial, which is the dark blue, have seen eventual growth, gradual growth in both of those. Commercial consistently remains roughly 4.8% and residential at 4%. The next chart shows the tax rate increase, which is the light blue bars for the city. And the line, the dark blue line on top, is the increase in the median homeowner tax bill. The fiscal year 2022 median home value was $752,000, and approximately half of the median home tax bill increase in the last 5 years is for major capital projects. And so we will, when we come to you in with a new budget, we will obviously bring a revised version of this chart. The next 3 charts show a quick projection on the 3 important indicators, the tax indicators that we have. So this one is for sales tax revenue, which is projected to grow over 6.8% compared to fiscal year 2022, and by 8.5% over 2021 actual. So the blue line is the budget line and the red line is the actual. And this is where we ended in 21. This is the projection for 22. And this was the budget for 21, which was adjusted downward with the COVID. This is the budget for 22, and this is what we're projecting, an increase of 6.8% over the 22 number. And the sales tax is strong primarily due to the increased grocery and the online sales that we have seen all through the COVID. And the 3, 5, and 10-year averages are still strong on this category, hovering between 5.5% to 8.5%. Next is the meals tax, which is projected to grow 38% over the current year's budget, which was significantly reduced during the COVID with a lot of the outdoor activity and the restaurant activity reduction. So we are seeing a return to the pre-pandemic levels in the last 2 quarters. We have seen that. So based on that, we are forecasting an increase of 37%. And compared to the current year's budget, the fiscal year 21 actual has actually exceeded the current year's budget estimate. So this is where you see that. This is another category which adds to the other tax revenue projections that are strong. Next one is the business license tax, and we are proposing to keep this kind of flat. It was projected that with the COVID, a lot of the business may turn over and we may see a lot of decline. However, we saw an increase in the construction activity and other businesses held. So we are proposing to keep that flat. The 3, 5, and 10-year averages are along those lines with 2 to 3% growth. So that's a recap of the revenues, the tax revenue categories. So now this chart, number 13, provides a 3-year, 5-year, and a 10-year average for organic revenue growth. And by that, we mean growth, which is net of any tax rate increases. Expenditures in the last, the averages for the general government and the school transfer. And it was requested at the last time to include the population change. So we've added that to the chart. This is a chart that we present on year end as well as the projections. So moving along, just a quick recap of what we saw here. In summary, the total tax rate growth is projected at 8.4% after accounting for real estate assessed value growth of 5.7% overall properties and a 15.6% growth in other taxes, yielding a net revenue for next year of 7 million. And after subject to any legislation changes and grocery tax impact to the city of 1.5 million, we are projecting remaining revenues, new revenues of 5.5 million for next year. I'd just like to take a couple of minutes to go over the known cost drivers that determine our expenditure side on the budget for next year. So compensation increases are projected at 1.8 million. And this is for investment in the employee compensation that has conversations that have been going on with council to include funding for the mid-year increases that are under discussion, adjustments for public safety, public works, and rec and parks wages for pay equity, and restoration of 4 positions that were frozen for half the year in the current year's budget. And so for that, and as well as each 1% compensation increase is 210,000. So to accounting for all that, we're looking at a 1.8 million for compensation increase. Again, along the lines of the earlier discussion, 10% increase for health insurance is projected to cost the city 250,000 We will know the exact numbers by February of next year. And that will be fed into the city manager's budget. 800,000 increase for just the known increases for the Fairfax County Social Services contract and the Arlington Public Safety and judicial contracts that we know, and a loss of the bike share grant, the maintenance grant that we would not get. So that increase in itself is going to be an impact of 800,000. And the WMATA subsidy for operating as well as capital piece is projected to increase by 550,000. In the past, we have used NVTA 30% funds and local subsidy. So we will see how it will impact the total impact to, I mean, its impact to the general fund, but the total subsidy is projected to grow by 550,000. I'd like to make a mention of some of the unknown drivers that may impact the budget when we present in March. So I want to say again that despite the strong revenue growth, there could be a significant impact resulting from the outcome of the state legislation, which would include elimination of as of now, the legislation includes elimination of the grocery tax, which is 1.5 million mandated school resource officers. So that's about 400,000, and other discussions that are at the table. Two of the other issues whose impact is not fully known, however, could have major budgetary impact include the inflation as well as the emerging strains of the COVID variants that we are seeing, the COVID virus. So the city is experiencing inflationary trends now with higher fuel costs and also equipment and supplies, and which could result in more cost of services that we provide. And we also would be monitoring our federal and state assistance that for infrastructure, stormwater, and other infrastructure projects. So that would be another piece of information that would feed into the budget proposal that we would have. At this point, I would like to hand over to Mr. Shields.
Kieran, and we do spend time each year on revenues because we both live with these revenue forecasts, and so we just want to have transparency about them so you understand kind of the numbers that we're looking at. And also at the end of the year, if we do run a revenue surplus, part of the spirit of a revenue sharing agreement has been in recent years that that revenue surplus gets shared between schools and general government as well. So some of the key things we'll be looking at over the coming budget cycle. Public safety is an area, one, where we have some compensation equity issues that we need to make up for, but also really significant trends in public safety, whether it's following through on the use of force review committee, whether it might be mandates on school resource officers, but also steadily rising calls for service, calls for 911, emergency calls for our police departments. So that's going to be a big feature, I think, of things we'll try to address in the coming budget. Affordable housing, we've been very successful in getting grant dollars, but sometimes those grant dollars have staff implications as well as local matching costs. And so we'll continue focus on that. Our social justice initiatives coming out of a lot of the council's strategic plannings about how we can ensure racial equity in the city, but also budgeting through the lens of how we're spending public dollars to make sure that there's equity in how those dollars are spent throughout the city. We are developing a community energy plan right now that will lay out the practical steps we need to take to meet the Paris Accords and the carbon reduction, carbon emission reductions that we need to make. The schools are doing their big part of that, and having this school ultimately being net energy neutral and generating as much energy as it uses. That's a huge thing for the city. Stormwater and transportation are a big focus now with infrastructure. After we've made investments in our facilities, this core infrastructure is going to be key, and grants are going to be a huge part of how we accomplish those things. And then the ongoing effort to update our fleet and other aging equipment. So those are some of the things that you'll be hearing from us a bit more on general government side, among many other priorities, but those are some of the ones that rise to the top for discussion tonight. Again, we're here in this point of the schedule of sort of coming together to look ahead about the process that we're about to embark on. Superintendent presents in January. CIP is worked on with the Planning Commission through February. And then all these things come together in March with a presentation to the City Council. I've highlighted these in sort of a red color just for people to be aware. We are planning to be a little bit later in our budget presentations this year. We're traditionally would be like March 14th, but taking an extra 2 weeks to try to, because there's just so much uncertainty on the revenue side, particularly with the General Assembly issues that Kieran highlighted, that we think it would be wise to take a little bit of extra time to get as much information that we can before we present. So that would be one change to the schedule this year. So that's the information we wanted to share tonight, and we'd be happy now to have a discussion, answer any questions, or get comment, and ultimately next week the City Council will provide, I think, some very high level direction on budget development this year. Thank you all for attention on a fairly lengthy presentation.
Maybe just each side, like, the City Council folks, I'll kind of corral them, and maybe you could do the same for the school board folks. I don't know who would like to go first. Are there questions or comments that people would like to make? Okay, I guess it's on a dessert. I think you have one on your side, maybe Chair Litton. Mr. Anderson. And then?
Thanks very much. This is really a procedural issue more than anything else. Obviously, we will be getting copies of the slides from tonight and other things. Is that correct? Okay. And just making sure that we've got that available so people can refer. That's really where I was going. Very procedural.
Okay.
Vice Mayor Connolly, did you have a comment?
It's just a comment really, and that is that as we've done this over the years, this is the 8th or 9th time I've sat through this as a council member and have sat through it previously before I was on council. This is a completely different budget picture than we've seen any other time. It's just that increase in assessments is much larger than we've ever had before. And then throw in the pandemic bounce back. It's a whole different budget picture to absorb. So thanks for pulling that all together and all those different parts. We really have to work together to make them work. Thanks.
And I would just note, there have been times of rapidly increasing assessed values in that 2002 through 2006 timeframe. Those were some years where we had AV growth of 17% in a year and things like that. And tax equity becomes an important part of the discussion as well, because that's a big burden. Usually it's not evenly shared between the commercial sector and the residential sector. This year, it's mostly on the residential sector. And so we do anticipate there'll be discussion with the council on tax equity between the different taxpayers of the city due to that sharper increase in SS value.
Can I ask Karen a question too? Karen, you said zero growth on commercial, but you said the new development wasn't included. So that's Founders Row has not been incorporated in. Is that a portion of it?
Yeah, I can jump in. So Founders Row each year is assessed as of January 1. This year will have a big increase in value for that property. And so that's part of the new construction picture. And then always there's lots of new construction that's happening out in the neighborhoods.
Right.
And that adds up to a significant factor as well.
And then on slide 5, you had 17% commercial and 41% residential. Is that about the same as it's always been? Has that changed at all?
Those numbers, so in terms of the overall split of the
The
tax
overall
base?
split of the taxes, if you want to go back to
Oh,
slide
I
5.
see
you
what
can
you're
see-
saying. Yeah. for
So
the
we're
pie chart.
working hard to increase our commercial portion of the budget. Has that changed or is that still about the same as it's always been?
So in terms of overall real estate revenues, about 17. So this is in terms of real estate, about 30% is coming from the commercial sector and about 70% is coming from the residential sector. Overall, from this point over to here is what is their commercial tax base. And so that is about 40% of our tax revenues coming from the commercial sector.
How does that compare to years past?
That's no dramatic changes to that. With COVID, we were very concerned about meals taxes, hotel taxes, sales taxes. And so we reduced those. Those are the charts that Kieran walked us through. Now we're bouncing back from those. And that's why we have that 15% projection for all these other local taxes as part of the bounce back.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Thank you. Kieran or Wyatt, that 8.4% increase that we're budgeting for 23, that's an increase over expected actual collections. Is that correct?
In terms of the overall revenues, yes. So that's a preliminary projection of the growth of organic revenues in the city.
Okay. What's that number over our original budgeted amount?
So
For
that
22.
that is a projection for next year
Mhm.
over the adopted budget that we're living in with right
Okay.
now.
And what's that increase over 21? What's our 23 over 21? Do we know?
I don't think we have that right in
Okay.
front of us, but we can get back with you on that.
That'd be good to know
Mhm.
before next week.
And part of this forecast for 23 encompasses the latest data that you got about a month ago on our year end for FY 21. And those revenues were strong in that presentation, as you'll recall. So now we're carrying those through into 2023.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I think this is all very positive news. I mean, the schools are coming in under our expected organic revenue growth. Got a lot of money coming in from state and federal sources, probably even more than we realize. I think our bigger challenges are going to be probably on the CIP front related to stormwater. But generally speaking, I think it's very good news. Of course, have to monitor, I think, some of the additional growth that we'll see in the real estate base, whether it's related to new construction on the commercial front or new construction on the residential front. But generally, I think it's very good news. I've got some additional questions, but I know there's others chomping at the bit here, so hold on.
Mr. Duncan, did you have an additional comment or question? Oh, I'm sorry.
And Mr. Ridinger jumped in too.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
No worries. So this is a question, I think, for both Dr. Noonan and Mr. Sharper, Ms. Bawa. One of the things I'm concerned about is the effect on staff and that we're being very fair to staff. I noticed when we go through the school presentation that, there is funding dedicated to step increases and restoration of step increases, but that's really, the equivalent in the school system of moving into a new job. You don't become a teacher supervisor and then a supervisor of teacher supervisors for the most part. You become a more experienced teacher. And so that's taken care of in the step system. And then the cost of living needs to be taken care of in a cost of living increase that actually raises the scale for steps. And while there is a step included, the cost of living increase that I saw in the school budget was only 2%. when inflation is 6.2%. And I think that's going to put us farther and farther behind our neighboring jurisdictions, particularly as there's a national teacher shortage. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what Dr. Noonan's thoughts are around that. Similarly, I admit I didn't get the same level of detail out of your slides in your earlier place, Mr. Shields, but I'm equally as concerned with making sure that we're treating our employees fairly within the general government. And so I know there's a lot of one-time money coming in for projects from the federal government that Mr. Lichtenhouse just referred to. But I do want to make sure that we are preserving the long-term viability of our very qualified teachers and very qualified general government staff by treating them fairly at a time when inflation is really starting to take off again. And I just want to make sure we handle that properly. Thank you.
So I'll take the first part of the question, Mr. Reidinger, thanks. So one of the things that we looked at was knowing that the guidance from the school board was to look at compensation first. And knowing that there was a lot of advocacy from the staff for the compensatory step that was missed. To do the compensatory step plus an additional step plus any COLA chews up a lot of the funding in the budget, and we wanted to maintain some opportunity to do some building of program, not expanding with more teachers and the like, but really building some program. So we did get $2 million in requests for new teachers, new programs, et cetera. Knowing that we couldn't fund all of that, we put a placeholder of the 500,000 in there, and that's as far as the money would take us, to be honest. So if we were to come back and look at the full split of the organic growth, we potentially could do a bigger COLA.
So that's, I think, the main point I want to emphasize, that the school's budget, or at least your recommendation to the school board, or likely recommendation to the school board for the budget, is based on the organic growth increase with the reduction based on the loss of the grocery tax, right?
Right.
So if that doesn't happen or additional revenue comes in, I think it would be important to look first to increasing the COLA so that we stay competitive with other jurisdictions. But I appreciate the fact, it's nice to say we're coming in under organic growth. I just want everybody to understand that there's a lot of pain for both the schools and I think the general government in the proposal of coming in under organic growth. So it's not days of wine and roses by any means. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that. And we will likely use the same methodology that we have in the past. And that is, as we go through the budget cycle, as decisions are made, and as we see potential money get freed up because we decide not to do something else, we'll pour that money towards an additional COLA. So last year, you might remember, we started with a 1% COLA, and I think we ended up with a 2.5% COLA for staff, sort of through that same methodology. But I appreciate your conversation.
Thank you for the question as well, and for the concern. So on the general government side, we had the pay freeze in 2021, just as the schools did. And so it's kind of part of that close coordination or just communication. We're not always in exact same step, but we do talk and we try to coordinate, and equity is important. And so our employees, we found ourselves in a compensation position right now where we are behind other jurisdictions, and we are losing staff. And so two areas we focused on is DPW operations and police. So we've done internal compensation market studies on those two elements of our workforce, and we've made changes to address the information that came out of those studies. And we're now embarked on a citywide market study that it so happens that just about every jurisdiction is doing one as well. And so the experts that help you with those are hard to get their attention right now. But we're working hard to have that be a fact-based and data-driven analysis by budget presentation in March. But I think it underscores a larger point that you made, I think, towards the end. Yes, this is a revenue forecast that is positive, but we have significant increase in costs that we have to meet. We do need to compensate our workforce. We also are seeing increased costs in our contractors. Our contractors are facing the exact same challenges on labor, and they're passing those costs to us as well. So a lot of this increase, I think, is going to be gobbled up by a lot of increase on cost pressure.
Mr. Duncan, did you have a question?
Thanks to Mr. Reininger for bringing up that concern. And what I wanted to ask Mr. Shields is from a scheduling perspective, how much of the work in addressing general government compensation are we going to do in the very immediate future, like, December 13th? And how much, relatively speaking, are we going to put into the 22-23 budget cycle discussion? What are you looking to us to do between now and the end of the year to address your concerns about vacancies, which are having a hard time getting filled, and employees who we're concerned we're going to lose to other jurisdictions that are paying more?
So the council on the 13th will consider a budget amendment, a mid-year budget amendment to allocate ARPA dollars as well as a portion of year-end surplus. And that's part of also the revenue sharing agreement. And so the schools have been part of that discussion from the beginning. So what the request of council is to approve some mid-year compensation increases that were discussed at your last work session. And we're actually sitting down tomorrow with the Employee Advisory Council to see if we can have essentially a unified recommendation to council on how to handle those mid-year compensation changes. So if the council takes action on that on the 13th, we then we would implement those immediately. And we also then will embark on the more systematic compensation study. That study is going to use the data of whatever the council decides on the 13th is going to be part of that study. And so I think some of the staff understand that in some respects that's a down payment on compensation to make it immediate, which is needed. But then that will flow into a bigger picture study that we'll embark on over the coming weeks.
Okay, just one other question. Thank you. To Dr. Noonan, can you just broadly characterize what the new spending that you would like to do within that $500,000 number that you used? What's the sort of general approach if it's mostly not to personnel? What are the kind of things that you would look to in that area?
Yeah, I think we're still having too many internal debates at the moment to opine too much on what that would look like. But when we do the presentation in January for the school board, we certainly will have it very detailed out. But there are just one example. We are currently looking at building a sustainability academy here at the high school where we can leverage the new building's sustainable energy. We are coming off the grid with solar. We are a geothermal school. We have the dashboards all around. We're a LEED Gold building. And so trying to leverage that sustainability for an academic program in combination with working alongside Arlington County schools and also the city of Fairfax schools will require some coordination. So there's probably likely to be some funds in there for coordination of that project and the like. So things that will also, and I'll just say this generally, really focus on some of the workload issues that our secondary teachers in particular are experiencing will be part of it as well.
Sorry, let me just put Amazon's involvement in the Arlington Career Academy, which I've read about. I don't know any details about. How does that affect us? Because we still send some of our kids down there now.
We do send some students down there, and so they do have access to it. And part of the conversation that our Chief Academic Officer, William Bates, is having with Arlington County is figuring out how we can develop a system where we're sending kids that are going there for the academy, the career academy there. Could some students come here and participate in our sustainability program? So these are some of the things that we're trying to look at for the future to utilize this building to its fullest capacity. Also reduce costs for the school system, because if we're bringing kids here and not having to pay for the kids that are going there, it would save us some money.
Any school board members? Vice Chair Downs.
Thank you both very much. And I'm not sure who to direct this question to. And I'm sorry if I missed this, but I was aware of the possibility of losing the revenue from the grocery tax. But the mandated resource officers, I'm sorry, I didn't. I was wondering if you all could expand on that a little bit. I missed that. Is that something that might be proposed, that we would have there could be a mandate that every one of our Falls Church City schools has a resource officer?
So there's that mandate, and I'll let you talk about it. The other one that we're watching closely too is the nursing mandate, where we'd have to have a nurse in every single school. So as of right now, because of the way, for example, the support cap is in place at the state, if school nurses are mandated in our schools, we would certainly work with Fairfax County, or a health district who's providing us nurses now. But they would end up having to provide us, 4 more nurses. And so there's going to be that additional cost to them, which then I'm sure would be passed along to us as part of the program. But school resource officers.
Yeah, so just taking the governor-elect's statements during the campaign that was an objective, we just factored that in to tally up what the cost would be. I don't think it would be sort of left to our own devices. Probably our top priority in terms of meeting public safety needs. I will say this, however, the safety of the schools is our top priority. And there's a great deal of coordination that happens between the school administration and city police. And in recent, today, and in light of the shooting last week, that coordination is happening right now. And so that will remain absolutely a high concern and high priority. Are school resource officers necessary for that? Probably not in every school, but they are very helpful to be so close with the school system that I think they've been very helpful to us in the past. I think that's mutually.
We really appreciate everything that Chief Gavin has done. And of course, school security remains on the forefront for us. We are one of the only schools in the region that has, front door that's staffed for everyone who comes in. A lot of the schools have the driver's license systems now that people have to put it through to see if there's any kind of report. But there's others less public, and I would prefer not to opine on them. Things that are in place to protect our students as well, that I don't want to give away.
No, thank you. And Wyatt, speaking on behalf of the school board, we always appreciate the partnership in terms of, securing the safety of our students. And I that answered my question. I just wasn't sure how strong of a mandate this was, and if it was something we were talking about having a police officer at every school. So that it seems like there's some sort of interpretation.
It's a rumble right now.
Right.
I think,
Okay.
In rumblings, there's rumblings. It's not
Right.
a rumble.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And one thing we'll just note is that this is all sort of looking ahead to discussions that will be in January and February when the General Assembly is in session. So we're speculating a bit at this point, but we're taking campaign promises at face value. And Cindy is our legislative liaisons. We'll be watching it very closely and worked very closely with, we kind of try to lobby together, school and general government together.
And it's going to be an interesting year at the state level, because there are, how it lines up. You've got a Democratic Senate and a Republican House, and then you've got a Republican governor and the Senate saying we're going to hold the line. So we could end up in some sort of special session that could extend the budget process into however many months. There could be all kinds of issues. So we're going to have to sort of take those as they come.
Mr. Snyder?
Sure. I think the discussion we've just had indicates the prudence of assuming the grocery tax hit and assuming the other campaign promises from the governor-elect. I think that's the right approach to take at this point.
Looks like you've got one on your side, Mr. Anderson, and then maybe Ms. Hardy.
So this question I'm thinking about, it builds a little bit on what Mr. Snyder was just saying. So thank you for the segue, Mr. Snyder. There's a fair degree of uncertainty with some of these things that affect tax rate, they affect income, they affect our ability to respond. So one thing that would be helpful is to understand what our ability to make adjustments is in some of these things. So if I am correct, once the tax rate is advertised, you can go lower, but you can't go higher. Is that correct? Okay. And we do, I think both bodies have the ability to do adjustments if there are budget expenses that go up. We certainly have done this in the past, where if we needed to make a mid-year adjustment, we could. But doing as little of that as we can possibly do seems, I'm also in favor myself of a more conservative approach, more generally speaking. Does lead me to one question, Dr. Noonan, for the school side, which is on the staffing, making the assumption that we're going to use the short-term enrollment estimate. The middle estimate, they call it, which oddly enough seems to be the higher of all three of them, seems to have a pretty big increase. So the question I would have is, if the enrollment were to go up significantly above that projection, how much flexibility is there? How much adjustment do you think would be needed?
It's a really good question. About 3 years ago, we started a staffing reserve just to be able to meet some of those requirements that do happen with spikes in growth. I think currently it's staffed with maybe one position. One position, how many? 2 positions. So we have flexibility to go up 2. So if it was 30 more students, that would be sufficient. If it was 50 more, it'd probably be sufficient. The hard part is that the new 50 kids aren't all 8th graders, right? So you can't just put in 2 8th grade teachers. They're sort of spread across the system. So we absorb them at different grade levels, and it does spike in different spots. So we have some flexibility, but not as much as we'd like. So it would be a challenge for us, I think, if we spiked like the middle, and missed the projection based on Weldon Cooper's short-term plan.
Thanks. And so my inclination is trying to build a little extra conservatism into it. On the other hand, you look around at what's happening with the enrollment across the Commonwealth, and it seems pretty consistent that it's dropping pretty consistently across the Commonwealth. So sticking with the estimate that you've given right now might actually be conservative. I don't know. Just something that's a little bit of a worry for me.
Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. I appreciated Phil R's comment around making sure we stay competitive with our salaries. Salary level or staffing levels is one that I'm also concerned about, especially in general government. So I think last week we've been discussing not only benchmarking salaries, but also benchmarking staffing levels. So why out of the 1.8 million for the increased compensation, is that all going towards salary or also staffing?
It's primarily salary. There are some frozen positions that were partially funded in the 22 budget that would now become fully funded in the 23 budget. So there are no new positions in that 1.8 million. It's just positions that council approved, but we had a freeze on them until say January when we could hire them for half of a year. And then the full freight is in the next year. In terms of staffing level, I think we need to have more discussion I need to have more discussion with the management team to really work through scope on that. It's very kind of gets right into the heart of our business and level of service and how many people we need to do it. And it's an intensive process when it's done correctly. So I want to engage a bit more on that, to think strategically about it, and then get back with council on a good strategic plan on how to move forward on that.
Got it. Because while we're together, I think it's appropriate to remember that at least on the general government side, we've frozen our salaries for the past 5 years in order to take on all these capital projects. And so we're definitely hearing from employees that now that we're past the big lift at the high school and the library and city hall, that it's time to kind of reassess what the staffing levels that we need, especially with all the projects we want to take on. I did actually want to respond to Mary Beth's question on what percentage of our real estate taxes come from commercial. I actually just quickly looked it up. So in FY19, 48% of our total revenue came from residential real estate and 12% came from commercial. And now that number's grown to 17%. So mixed use development is working. And on that note, I actually had a request somewhat tangentially related to budget, but I think I've mentioned in the past that the best time, in my opinion, to do proactive capacity plan is when we don't have capacity issues. And so right now, it looks like we have room in our schools. I'd love for both general government schools to get together to figure out what room do we have in our schools? What's our development patterns look like in the city, to make sure that helps inform future development and housing policy decisions so that we're not caught surprised by, a spike somewhere down the road. So I think it's a really good time to do it now while we've got room and we're past all the big buildings that we need to do. Thank you. That's it.
We'd be happy to do that. We feel really good about where we are, and you're right. This is the time to make sure that in the long term, we've got the capacity. I do want to just comment on staffing issues on the school side, and we are very fortunate right now to be almost fully staffed throughout the year. We have a couple of long-term substitutes that are in. I have a general concern, and I'm hoping that everybody in here can kind of help us with that, and that is sort of what's happening with the teacher pipeline at the university levels. We're not seeing people come out of the university wanting to go into teaching. And part of that is sort of the general value that people see, or they see teachers in comparatively to other professions that make a lot more money. And the other part of it is through COVID, it's been a real challenge for teachers because they have taken on a lot more than they normally would. And then also haven't been particularly, people haven't been particularly thankful for the experiences that they have put in. So the more we can do to sort of support our teachers and make sure that everybody understands the challenges that they've met and faced and really sort of moved through would be, I think, on behalf of the city, really a helpful piece too. So I just put that out there because I do worry in the long term if we're going to get the applicant pool that we have in the past. I know nobody else in the state is, and we're seeing, I have colleagues that are telling tales of woe that they are, 22 positions still unfilled from the beginning of the year, and their school systems are smaller than ours. So.
Mr. Lichtenhouse?
Dr. New, it's a great point when you think about the last 18, 24 months. When you think about the challenges we have from a staffing perspective, whether it's morale or it's just filling vacancies. I mean, a lot of it's, teachers, law enforcement, other folks taking fire on all sides from how things have been politicized. So I can imagine that staffing is going to continue to be a concern. And that leads to my next couple of questions, which is, I think everybody agrees that staffing is a major problem. And I know that we talk about it on a regular basis in budget conversations with the schools, just given the significant portion of your budget that goes towards salaries. So my question is, and I think this is partly for edification for folks in the community and others, I think in general government staff, that, look at the consistent transfer to the schools versus general government every year. And there was a slide up there, or in some cases, you'll see a 5-6% transfer to the schools. In some cases, it's flat or significantly below. What's the percentage of budget for general government that goes towards salaries, comparatively speaking, to the schools?
So portion of the city budget that goes towards city salaries, or the portion
Dr.
of the budget
Noonan,
that goes to the
what's
schools?
the percentage of the money you guys get that goes specifically towards salaries?
It's in the neighborhood of about 85%
85%.
salary and benefits.
If we were to say the same thing for city, what would that number be?
Not having the exact number in front of me, I think it's around 50%.
Okay. So I just think that that's important because that question has come up quite a bit in terms of looking at the transfer year to year. And so I think it's important for us to clarify that there's a significant more amount of money that goes in the schools towards salary and benefits than it does the city. Now, with that being said, at least my next question, which is the money that we're proposing that we put towards salary for general government compared to what the schools are proposing. And again, it gets a little bit complicated because we're talking about mid-year compensation changes for city staff, which, by the way, I could not agree more. I won't get into the business of exactly how school boards dealing with their own compensation challenges here in the school system, but generally speaking, for the city, it has been incredibly challenging. I know for a number of our different divisions and employees who showed up, had to work in person, and in some cases because of that pay freeze. So when you look at the compensation increases that have been recommended for the schools and what's being recommended for the city, would you say that where we're going to end up from a general government perspective, that our increases in at least making folks whole is commensurate with what the schools are doing, at least as part of this budget?
So I think what the council is considering for a mid-year compensation adjustment for general government is higher than what the schools are considering. And but I do think that ultimately we will have this compensation study, we'll have data, and then that will inform what we do on compensation for 2023. We'll stay in close contact with the schools as they're doing their budget as well. And as we said earlier, we'd like to try to keep an eye on each other because memories are long in our organizations, and we still always, I think probably on both sides, hear comments from our employees about what the schools did versus what general government did. And it's not appropriate that it always be exactly the same. In years past, the schools have done compensation studies and made strategic decisions on how they were going to change compensation and carried out that strategy. And general government does the same. But on normal years, you'd like to be pretty similar.
And I would say I'm certainly not. I don't support the notion of complete parity in lockstep because it's much more complicated that when you get into compensation and you look at budgets. But I do think it's important for us to recognize, both sides. Certainly, the conversation we're having from a city council perspective to make sure that either through EAC, or the employment base, that through that compensation study, that folks feel appropriately recognized for the value that they bring for their specific positions, because there are certain positions in general government versus positions in the schools that may seem the same, but they're not necessarily the same. It's a different story. And so while parity sounds great, it's much more complicated than that. But I guess generally what I would like to say is that I want to make sure that going into these mid-year adjustments, going into the compensation studies, and certainly going into a fiscal year 2023, where Mr. Reitinger, I know, is maybe a little bit less optimistic than I am. I'm generally a very optimistic person. I'm going to remain optimistic as long as possible. I do feel very good about the city's future over the next couple of years, financially, especially with the commercial and economic development coming down the pipeline. And I want to make sure that we take every single opportunity right now to make sure that we invest in, frankly, what are the most important aspect of bringing all of this to fruition, whether it's building the school, building 10 acres, the economic pipeline that's going to support this $104.7 million budget, and then some. And that's the individuals, both in general government and the schools. And so this is the year to do it, in my opinion, going into 23, to make sure that we have folks whole. And we've got a plan from a compensation perspective to invest in those individuals that are going to bring all this again to light for us. So those are my comments. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other comments on the city side?
All right. Any other comments on our side? I do. Actually, I just have a question. And this is, it's sort of for Peter, but also relating to the city budget. I know we have some really challenging areas, things such as bus drivers, substitutes, where we're really, we can see across the country, those jobs are extremely hard to fill. And I think they may even become more hard to fill in an area like this, where it's so expensive to live. I'm just sort of curious how you see us addressing that, and curious if there are similar types of jobs on the city side where you're really seeing some challenges coming down the pipe.
So I'll start with the substitute piece. There was an interesting article probably 3 weeks ago in the New York Times about a substitute teacher who was more in demand than like a math teacher. It was amazing. And we're not immune to that, and we're seeing it. So we did do a mid-year compensation increase for our substitutes because they're hourly and we can use one-time money for that. The other thing that we did is we did a pretty significant, I want to thank Kristen Michael for this, and John Brett, a survey of our substitutes to ask them why aren't they taking the jobs, what would make it more interesting for them to come. And during the time of the study, our elementary students were not vaccinated. And so part of what we learned was that there was some concern about not substituting in elementary schools. Some of it was about money and some of it was about training. And so the other thing that we're working on right now to build the sustainability for our substitute pools, specifically around two areas. One is general substitutes will get more training of how to manage a classroom, how to get into Schoology, use some of the technology. But we also asked in the survey if there was a core group of people that wanted to become part of a cohort to be trained specifically in working with special needs students. And we had 6 people respond and say they want to be specially trained to help with special needs students. So we're actually going to be pulling that cohort to get them some training as well. With our bus drivers, Krista, Miss Michael, I don't know if you want to say anything about the bus drivers. My donuts on Friday aren't going far enough.
One of the things is when we look at our mid-year salary enhancement that we've made, we plan for a flat bonus payment, right? And that flat dollar amount helps people with lower incomes by a greater percentage than our higher paid employees. So that's one element we've done. The state has a bus driver shortage statewide. So we've also applied for a state grant that would allow us to give our current bus drivers a retention bonus. So we're really hopeful that we'll get that money to try to target that. And then we'll really continue to watch competitiveness with surrounding jurisdictions, both in terms of pay, but also in terms of working conditions, right? We know it's important for them, both in terms of their salaries, but also the environment that we create.
For the question on the general government side, maybe 3 big areas of concern, and then I'll end on a 4th. DPW operations, the men and women who are out picking up leaves right now and who repair the streets and take care of our facilities. That's been very difficult to keep and retain those positions. So we've had a lot of turnover in that area, and we're working very hard to fill those positions. Police nationally has been very tough. It's been a very hard time to be a police officer. The job has changed in many respects, and in some respects, very positive ways. But there have been big changes in the force and public safety, and we're working through that right now. IT is tough, I think, in local government to compete with the private sector. And then I'll end with a 4th, which is something everybody in the room cares about, which is our crossing guards. And it underscores, I think, probably just how special Janet and Audrey and Sarah and Bill were, that they were able to do that job for so long. And that's a special treat. Bill Abel came and he was in town, and I got to see him just the other day. He was visiting. But when Janet left, we had that position open for a year. We've not been able to fill any crossing guards. And so we shifted to public safety aides, and they do parking enforcement, crossing guard, animal warden. They do a whole host of services, and it's a full-time job. So that's how we've transitioned to kind of make that more palatable to today's workforce.
Just got a really quick question, maybe for Mr. Shields and Ms. Paula. Maybe I missed it in the presentation, but the 8% increase in residential AV, what does that translate to in the average tax bill? Do you have that number approximately?
Would you be able to do that math? So if the average house is right now about $800,000, so 8% of that, yeah. So that's where the tax equity discussion will come when we're discussing in March about how to handle our budget. And so trying to anticipate that with this forecast, I think will be the discussion next week on December 13th in the context of budget guidance as well.
Other questions on the city side, at least about what we just discussed? I know, Mr. Shields, you had a few things you wanted to also add. I don't know if there's anything, Chair Litton, on your side.
Last call. Any school board members? Any further questions or comments? All right, not seeing any. I'd say go ahead to Mr. Shields.
Okay, well, thank you. And so for this part of the program, we're joined by an outstanding city employee, former city employee of the year for her work on the bringing the Falls Church Gateway project through the entitlement process, and that's Carly Aubrey, and she's joining by Zoom. And so we wanted to do 2 things. One, there are just important things for everybody to be aware of in terms of the development schedule, and I'll touch on those briefly. But we also have, we can just sort of wrap things up just on the street names that are proposed. And I think the school board has seen these names. The print is a little bit small, so I've got another slide that blows up these names. But before, Carly, before we talk to the street naming issue, because that's going to go to city council next week for council action on the street names. But in terms of impacts that I think everybody needs to anticipate over sort of schedule for construction of the 10-acre site. If the Meridian High School is right here and Route 7 is running along this way and Haycock is coming up this way and Virginia Tech is right up here, the construction of the 10-acre site is anticipated to get underway in next spring. The development team is telling us probably like right around beginning of April. Prior to that time, you know, the big mountain out here, that's going to be starting to be addressed in the winter months. And you'll see some additional work on site, but construction proper would likely start in the spring. One thing that the community will experience, and we need to be prepared for it, is the taking down of the trees. And so we'll have lots of, advance notice for that, but that will be a big change visually when that step in the process happens. You'll also see the power lines coming down around the perimeter. You'll see that happen very early. The conduit has all been laid, and that was done now 2 summers ago. And so that'll be another thing that people will see visually. But the most important thing that we're coordinating on is the construction of the Mustang Alley. And that is scheduled for a very intensive workout next summer. And so we want them to be staged so on the last day of school, they can really get going on this. And absolutely, by the first day of school, have this road be complete with the bicycle track, with the pedestrian way, all ready to go, safe. And this area all fenced off and kind of away from students coming to and from school. We're also working with the development team to front load the completion of this intersection at Haycock. So that would be a signalized intersection so students can have the benefit of the crossing guards, but also have the protection of a stoplight as they come to school. So that would mean sort of the safe route to school would be to stay on Haycock until you cross up here. And we're working with the school team just to coordinate that, make sure that that plan is going to work well. Currently, students, as you know, cross mid-block with the assistance of crossing guards. So those are some of the kind of the high-level updates. I do want everyone to be aware that we meet every other week with the school team, the development team, the general government team, and the school construction team to try to advance, plan the things that are going to be happening over the coming months. One other important thing, Clark Construction will be the general contractor for most of the work here. And we're going to have very strict protocols in terms of how they police their subs and in terms of their interaction with staff and most importantly with students. We had an incident that the superintendent witnessed with one of our subs who was working on some of the conduit work, which is completely unacceptable. When the general contractor's on scene, I think those things will be much more systematic in terms of how they're policed. And at any rate, we'll do everything we can to avoid situations like that. So Ms. Aubrey, are you on the line just to talk about street naming?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And so I've got this slide, which shows where the street names are, and then the next slide, which has a little bit of a bigger font so people can actually see them. But could you just give us a quick update? And this is not neat. We don't need to have a deep discussion on these, but we just wanted everyone to be aware of the names and sort of a last chance to modify them before they come to City Council, possibly for final consideration on Monday.
Okay. Good evening, Council and School Board. So this slide here shows the temporary street names that everybody saw on the site plan, and then the proposed street names. And this was introduced in October. And since then, we have taken this to the Planning Commission, Rec and Parks, Historic Commission, and the Urban Forestry Commission. And based on their feedback, the development team has proposed some revisions to the original names that they had brought forth. And that's shown in that right-hand column. So starting with the main southwest road, and Wyatt, it might be easier to go back to that. Yeah, thank you. For the main north-south road heading from Leesburg Pike to the metro station, that's proposed to be West Falls Station Boulevard. The word station was added to help distinguish it from another West Falls that's within the city. And this was preferred by the city's chief of police and also our GIS analyst who reviews street names. And I would like to mention the Fairfax County, we coordinated with them, and West Falls Station or West Falls Boulevard was suitable with them. The next, I'd say Main Street going east-west from Haycock to the schools, the entire length was proposed originally as Magnolia Street. That received some mixed reviews. What the development team is proposing now is on the western side to provide another nod to the schools by naming it Husky Street. And that leads to the future Kiss and Ride drop-off loop. And then Cardinal Lane is being proposed to be both that full loop, almost like dog leg around block 1, B1. And that was because Arbor Way had been proposed where you see it at block C and at block 1, but there was concern about confusion of having two segmented Arbor Ways. The final one, the green road you see was originally proposed as Mulberry Lane, and there was concern if there is going to be a tree theme that it should be native trees, and mulberry is actually, there's a lot of exotic varieties of mulberries. So the suggestion was to pick a native tree, and so redbud is now proposed. As Wyatt mentioned, this is going back to council on the 13th, and that will include the commission's recommendations as well as public comments received.
I think we have a few questions on the city side here. Maybe Vice
Mr.
Mayor
Duncan and
Connolly.
I are just having a sidebar conversation. We personally prefer Dogwood Street to Magnolia Street. Magnolia is much more of a deep south term than a Virginia term. But
we looked at that. There's a
yes,
Dogwood Lane with a Falls Church address right outside the city. So there was concern about confusion on that. But
Other comments, Mr. Lichtenhouse?
So the developers, I mean, from a trade name perspective for these addresses for the businesses that are going to be located there, are these going to be the trade addresses for the businesses, Carly? Meaning if I'm the hotel, am I like 100 West Falls Station Boulevard, or am I 100 Husky Street?
the hotel will be addressed off of West Falls Station.
Okay. Do we know which businesses or which components of the commercial development will have those addresses as a trade address?
I have a map with that, not handy, but I think the hotel, block C, which is the condo, the senior housing.
Okay.
I think the
Yeah, I mean, but
retail-
has that conversation taken place with the developers?
The addressing, yes, it's been worked through with them.
Okay. Okay. I mean, listen, I'm all for a nod to native plantings and the surrounding schools, but my primary concern is what's a trade address that is going to drive the most business into that commercial development. But I'm sure that they've thought through that. West Falls Station Boulevard just seems like a really long address. And if I was going to have a trade address for a business, I think I'd prefer for it to be, yeah, Husky Street. Yeah. Anyway, I'd like to know that personally if they're going to use some of these streets as the trade addresses, because again, call me maybe somewhat old fashioned, but I do have a feeling that I have a strong feeling that addresses can impact business foot traffic that truly can't. So there's a couple that I prefer something different. Maybe we can talk about that later.
So we will be talking about this at your meeting next week, and I don't know to what extent the school board is interested in all the details of it, but we did want to share it because it is an area of branding for Meridian as well. And so we just want to have a joint discussion before a more in-depth discussion with the school board, with the city council.
All right. Was there any discussion about using Meridian in any of these, or I guess it's taken already?
Yes, we looked at that and it is taken in the city.
Gotcha. Okay. Other comments or questions, at least on the city side?
Okay, Carly, thank you so much for your work on this, and we will talk tomorrow and get this ready for council consideration next week.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you. Do you have something else, Vice Mayor Connolly? Okay, of course. Go ahead.
Are we just about? I just have one other thing that has been on my mind, and I just want to make sure that the school board members, those leaving and those arriving, are aware of, and that is the issue of voluntary concessions on our mixed-use development. And those are changing and evolving as we go. And I just want everyone to be aware of that. Up until most recently, most of the voluntary concessions that came in from developers always had a certain amount for school capital cost related to expanding enrollment. And that's how we've managed to fund a good portion of Mount Daniel and the Oak Street addition and Jesse Thackeray and part of the school too, because they're large contributions. The most recent one that we approved, the Insight development on the corner of Broad and Washington, does not have school capital contribution. And that was sort of a last minute development as we went through, because it seems like a lot of the school capital related to capacity has been taken care of. And so the developer put a lot more into affordable housing, which is now a pressing need for the city. So as we go forward, developers come forward with voluntary concessions, and I just want to make sure that you're part of that conversation so that if there are capital needs that relate to enrollment, we can deal with it. We don't have to discuss it now. I just don't want to end up, last time we were like the week before the event, we had to figure out exactly how this was going to work out. So I just want to make sure we put that out there, that voluntary concessions are something that come up that we need to collaborate on as we go forward.
Thank you, Mary Beth, for raising that. And I think, I know on that one, it was kind of a quick turnaround, but we did agree. But I guess this is my own personal feeling. It does make me a little uncomfortable that I feel like we're setting up affordable housing against school costs, because I really think they are both very important. And I know we don't have really pressing needs right now, but I do just raise that concern because I feel like it's a difficult place to be when you're making decisions between those two. So, I don't know. I know developers are difficult to work with, but if there is some way in the future, maybe we can avoid that dichotomy. I think it would be really helpful from our side.
My recollection of that was, I remember speaking with Wyatt about it and him saying, do you think the school board would be interested in this one opportunity to make that shift? And so I did work with all the school board members, and Chair Litton did write a letter saying that we agreed to it this time, but it wasn't going to be a long-term strategy, as I understand it.
Thank you. And thank you, Chair. Vice Mayor, the one thing I noticed is it's probably worth some time, going through what we used to call the Chavern chart on where housing comes from or where our students come from. Because if you look at that, you'll see one of the drivers to the fact that we haven't had significant increases in enrollment since 2017, 2018 is the fact that no new real mixed use development entities have come online. And one of them, Pearson Square, has reduced a little bit. The big delta we've seen is that that single family homes have sort of flattened out in terms of what the overall number of students is. And then mid-rise developments have fallen back, particularly Falls Green, what used to be Oakwood, but some other ones have reduced as well. And that's driven, that's about, I think about 180 student reduction out of the total change. You can see, though, that new mixed-use developments, while they will certainly, I have no doubt that the council's analysis and the city and schools analysis that they pay for themselves is worthwhile. We do get new students from them. And so I don't want there to be a misperception that there's no effect on enrollment. Pearson Square, while it has gone down, has still been the single biggest influx of new students that we've had for new construction, of course. And so I think it's important to look at those in some detail, figure out the extent to which we need to put additional dollars into school sizing in order to address things, and then do what's best for the city, of course. So thank you.
Mr. Snyder, did you have an additional comment? Any other comments, at least on the city side? Yes, please.
I just had a question. When you said that voluntary concessions, the approach is going to change, is that going to change towards an official policy moving forward or an official plan? Or is it going, when you say it's going to change in that every project will be treated differently?
It changes all the time. So every project that comes in, there's a different set of voluntary concessions, and we look at what the needs in the city are. And over time, it has changed, so it's going to continue to change.
Right. So moving forward, there shouldn't be an expectation that what's been done in the previous project will be mirrored in the next project. Each project will be taken on its own as an independent approach to those VCs. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, that's what I see Mr. Snyder shake his head. And I feel like it's just one of those things that we continue to assess every time we approve voluntary concessions.
Right. So the expectation should not be to expect what's been done before to necessarily happen again. Whether you're whether from the schools or from parks or libraries or whoever is getting money, there shouldn't be an expectation that previous projects will be mirrored in future projects.
Correct. And I think basically, I just want to make sure that the door is open, that the school board is involved in those changing conversations, whatever they are.
Thanks.
Sorry.
I guess the more simple way to think about it is capital needs change over time. And so as capital needs change over time, voluntary concessions appropriations changes over time. And so just like how we collaborate on the CIP, I would expect us to collaborate on how we use the VCs as well.
Mr. Snyder, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just agree, particularly with the initial comment that we should not be pitting affordable housing against the schools. Those are two major priorities, and they shouldn't be pitted against each other. And I agree. I think that was the initial comment from the schools, and I couldn't agree more.
All right, thank you. Any other comments, at least on our side? Any other business we need to transact tonight, Dr. Noonan?
Yeah, I wanted to say, if you haven't had a chance before, and I don't know if tonight is the night because I'm not sure the lights are on, but I would invite you to come back at some point on the third floor. We have one of our sustainability dashboards that's on the wall, and it's in the Dan Z sustainability wall. So there's a graphic that's named after Dan. The screen is there, his name is there, and it's Chinese characters, and it's a real nice tribute, I think, to Dan and his work on environmental sustainability in the city. So I'd invite you to come back and take a look at that some other time, but did want to let you know that it's up and all the graphics are up and it looks really great. So.
Thank you for that nice tribute to our colleague Dancy. So, Chair Litton.
Sorry, I just wanted to raise one other issue, and we don't need to discuss this tonight. And I obviously am going to be leaving, but I just kind of want to put it out there as something I think we're both really going to need to coordinate together on. And I just don't want it to see it fall through the cracks. And it's kind of simple, but it is like walking to school routes as this construction is going on. I mean, I think it's already pretty concerning when I see a whole crew of kids standing on that corner and people are barely stopping and making that right turn onto Route 7. I think a number of us are concerned just about safety here. And so I think it's a challenging issue because it's both of ours in some ways. So I would just encourage you all, hopefully in the year ahead, to really be working together on that, because I think it's extremely important. We don't want to wait until something bad happens and then address the issue.
Great point. I think collectively, that's a problem that can be solved. At least I think it can be. So anything else? Any final words anyone has before we adjourn? I don't know, Chair Litton, if you have anything you want to say.
I don't, except just to say thank you to all of you, as this will be my last meeting joining you all. It's been a pleasure to work with all of you over the last 4 years, and I have a feeling my other board members who are leaving would say the same thing. We've really appreciate the time working together with you guys. So thank you.
I think the feeling's mutual, and I think your accomplishments speak for themselves. This beautiful building we're in right now is just extraordinary, and I think our community has waited so many years for this, and it's great to have collaboratively put this together. So thank you all for your great work, particularly those who are departing. So thank you. Anything else, or should we adjourn the meeting? and-
Shall we get a picture of everyone before we all go?
Sure, that'd be
We
great.
have our current school board and current city council and new members as well, and kind of go over there
Sure.
We'll go up against here.
or up against the books, maybe.